Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Alexi the Greek.
And I'm Ryan Cooper. Today we're discussing some newsy topics that all come under the heading of sort of the police and courts, I guess, the criminal justice system, criminal punishment system, however you want to characterize it. And yeah, I think most obviously there's these protests on college campuses across the country against the war in Gaza. And there's been a bunch of high profile incidents, basically, that I think they started out at Columbia, that there's a protest there and it was violently cleared by the NYPD. And this sparked a reaction, wave of outrage at many other campuses where they set up encampments. And they were also confronted with violence. And
by the way, it's especially weird at Columbia because there is a special free speech zone where you do your protests, which is already like kind of weird because shouldn't free speech not be restricted to a zone? Like, shouldn't that be pervasive? Anyway, but this is like the place on campus at Columbia going back, to 68 when they had all kinds of other problems that this is reminding people of. And that's where they're doing it. So they're following all the rules in that respect. But in order to call in the police, they had to say that they're trespassing. But it seems like a kind of circular thing because how could they be trespassing? Well, we're going to suspend them. Well, why are you suspending them? Because they got arrested. Well, wait a minute. Why are they arrested? Because they were trespassing. Well, wait a minute. I thought they're not trespassing unless you suspend them, and you can't suspend them until the. So it's one of these weird, like, nonsense kind of things where they're just like, you're in trouble because we don't like the speech you're saying, and so we're going to have the police violently remove you, even though you are by all rights entitled to, as a student, be on campus and protest in the free speech zone. Yeah. So there is that weirdness, and then the swift and violent way that it's being dealt with by the president calling in the NYPD. And apparently even the NYPD initially was like, I don't know, this doesn't seem like we love making arrests for any reason. This seems weird.
Yeah. There's a number of other, clips of things going around. There's
all over it. Cause now we're at like 20 plus campuses, something like that.
Yeah. The big violence at Princeton. There's a instantly iconic video of this Emory professor, the chair of the philosophy department, just like politely asking this cop, who is arresting a student, why he's being arrested, and they just instantly knock her to the ground and drag her off.
It was even worse. I think she saw that the student was being the cop had the knee on the head.
Yeah, the old George Floyd move, which cops love. Yeah. They saw that and they're like, damn, I wish I could do that. I love standing on people's necks for 9 minutes.
They'd make a statue of that incident if they could.
Yeah, absolutely. They probably somebody has done. There's a statue of that guy in a police union hall somewhere. And anyway, to close out that story, that professor is now being charged with battery and disorderly conduct by the fucking district attorney or whoever, is in charge of these decisions.
I think maybe the president of Emory has decided not to press charges, which is like, it's just such a perverse turnabout about, I don't know. It's, when your elderly chairs of philosophy are getting thrown to the ground,
Yeah. And the other thing to mention about this is that the cop is wearing full on combat gear, like a video game character, like camouflage, here in this peaceful college campus, it's meticulously maintained grounds. And he's wearing full on camouflage and a balaclava and goggles.
Oh,
and,
yeah. They all look like they're going to war. That's right. Yeah. This is like Ferguson. This is the militarized police who are marching to take on the, the insurgents or something, right? It's and these are the, same idiots in Texas at University of Austin who literally wouldn't go in to save kids being murdered at school.
It's not their job. You might get shot if you do that. Fuck that. No, it's not how I got in the business. I got in the business
beating up college kids and now professors.
Exactly. Wow. Yeah. When's the last time a philosophy professor, fought back when you're beating him with a baton? You know, that's what police do. They don't run into the line of fire to save innocent children from being butchered en masse. Hell no. Hell no. Number one job, as police literally say this, is to get home to your family safe. Other people's families, fuck them. Not my problem.
Practice beating up kids. And you know what? It's nice when you can beat up kind of a middle-aged woman who's the chair of the philosophy department, because then that can just be practice for beating up your wife when you get home. You know,
gosh, yeah, you take that home. Yeah, that's real classic. But a thing, before we get off the point of militarized, I think we should emphasize that these cops are like even more heavily armored and even more, I think, tellingly, their faces are more obscured than actual soldiers. Like, this was a big thing during the whole Ferguson protests and later, that you had like Iraq war veterans posting pictures from when they were part of the invasion of Iraq, and they're wearing like half the kit of these like Ferguson cops. And I think it tends to demonstrate, you know, that you know, at this point, actual military soldiers probably would not be as brutal as these cops are, you know, because they're trained in a different way, and they are not. I mean, I think above and first and foremost, you know, military officers have to be trained to, you know, to be in the line of fire. That's not how police are trained to be absolutely chicken shit, pants pissing little babies who are in terror of their lives at every second. They're not about running into, you know, sniper fire to rescue a downed colleague or anything like that. They're about cracking hippie skulls. That's why, you know, again, why they got into the game. It's a different kind of institution. And that's not a great thing to say. You know, like, I wouldn't want the military on the college campuses either.
No, I think. Did you see they set up snipers in Ohio State? They had snipers in the roof.
They weren't. Yeah. The people were pointing out historically that like Nixon embraced the Kent State massacre in what was that, 68 or 70? And a bunch of, you know, conservative blue collar people that thought it was great. Yeah. Stick it to those, literally stick it to them bullets, stick to the liberal hippies who are trying, you know, protesting the war in Vietnam. And yeah, you know,
apparently 3 of those 4 Kent State, students who were killed were Jewish. I don't know if you knew that.
I did not know that. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
But yeah, and then as the face covering thing, I think that's a deliberate attempt at, you know, self-dehumanization. Yeah. You know, you're trying to remove your humanity and the ability of the other people to see your reactions, which again, you know, the military doesn't want that because, you know, you're entering into, you know, you need to communicate with your colleagues. And then also, you know, insofar as you're in like civilian areas or something like that, you don't want to seem like a stormtrooper, you know, and these guys, that's what they want. You know, these cops, they want to be.
Well, and here also the cops probably want to try to remain anonymous because so that they can get away with their many crimes. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a thing. Obscuring the badge numbers, you know, taping over them.
Yeah.
And that's against the law. But who cares? Who's going to enforce that on the cops?
This is such a weird thing because as you know, you pointed out to me before the episode started, like the crackdown, not just at Columbia, but other places, because strangely, there's been like a uniform violent response, like quick violent response to these protests. And what it's done is it's enlarged the protests. Only more people have come out to protest as a result, of course, which is like entirely predictable. And it's especially weird because this is the end of the academic year. We're like finishing up. So just a prudential question from the self-interested perspective of like administrators and college presidents. What the hell are you thinking? Like, what, a few weeks, this goes away, like in terms of like students have to go home, like the year is over. Why are you doing this? Like, what?
Yeah. I have some theories. I mean, you probably would be better positioned to speak to the mindset of the college administrator class, you know, who seem like profoundly dim-witted on a structural basis. But I think there's 2 things, like, well, maybe 3 things. Let's see how many things I can think up. I mean, first of all, you have the fact that the problem of cops in this country has not been solved. You know, it was like Biden and everybody, 4
years ago, the 2020 George Floyd protests. So, but besides being like 1968 in an election year and resembling in Colombia, the very kind of confrontation that students had with the administration and cops, we had this massive uprising all across the country, especially led by young people, in an election year, and a fascistic response. And we're getting that all over again, right?
Yeah. In fact, I think it's gotten worse because now the police are insanely pissed that anyone has dared to sass them at any level, let alone a huge protest movement. And so they've just been, I think, clearly itching and sweating to get out there and like stomp some powerless college students, which that, by the way, remember, that was one of the central incidents of the George Floyd protests, atrocities, was that Philly cop, what's his name? Joey Baloney. Literally Joey Baloney beating the shit out of a Drexel kid with a bike helmet on, just wailing on this dude on the ground. And that is just like, that is police mindset right there. Powerless, little stick, thin armed Drexel kid sitting on the ground, helpless, just this fat Italian guy, just boom, boom, boom. And, the administrators, I think, well, either they know or they don't, but the fact is, if you open the seal, if you call those cops in, that's what they're going to do. They're not going to, peacefully negotiate with the protesters for, to clear the encampment or whatever.
Which is why it's perverse that they say the reason, this is the new thing in 2024, the reason to call the cops is for student safety, as we're calling the cops to crack skulls of students. And then we're suspending, and that's the other thing. Then there's like the punitive nature of the response is not just the cops. It's like people are being banned from campus for a year for setting up a tent. Like there are just all these punitive actions and disciplinary actions being done. But it's because they care about students and their safety. Yeah.
Yeah. Jesus. So people were pointing this out on Blue Sky, but like, remember back in like 2015, 2016, when Milo Yiannopoulos was touring colleges across the country and all our free speech warriors were like, oh, we need to be exposed to his ideas, his really good ideas.
Yeah. You're such snowflakes with your safe spaces. Can't you take free speech?
And he was so inflammatory and had, packed. There's so many people like Nazis would come to his events that, the security costs would be like $500,000 to do one of these events that the university would have to pay, according to their like event like rules and stuff. And there's one
hate speech. Yeah.
At the University of Washington in 2016, someone was shot at one of his events, and the university administration was just like, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? That's the second thing I would mention is that, you see like the sort of deep structure of like what sort of person is considered a full citizen, and like, whose grievances must be like, they're just like, instinctively indulged, and who's get like, literally beaten down with sticks and tear gas. And it's sad. Right. It's like white conservative, the archetype, they're not all white, but like the conservative male inflected, patriotic, real American, quote unquote, is like that. These type of people, well, we have to listen to them. The Trump voters and diners. These people are the ones who matter. And
I don't remember a lot of crackdowns on the like Tea Party types or the anti-mask rally MAGA types who are like burning masks ritually and like just losing their shit, bringing guns to these rallies for freedom and singing patriotic songs while they're burning masks because they were like rebelling against the tyranny of like protecting, public health regulations. I didn't see any crackdowns there, right? That was no, go for it.
No, the Capitol Police brass and the Secret Service and the FBI all had extensive warnings about January 6th and publicly communicated to them by a lot of prominent people, who were just looking at like the internet. They were all this shit was organized in public, or a lot of it was, and they were posting on Reddit or the Reddit clone.
And all the threats are out in the open about like, killing Congress people, about killing Mike Pence. Just couldn't be more out in the open. Meanwhile, these claims of like anti-Semitism and hate against the anti-war, anti-genocide protesters, it's like made up stuff or exaggerated stuff or like outside agitators. It's very hard to like actually document any kind of hate speech or any kind of thing that's a real threat to any student safety. I mean, you have some idiots, no doubt, and some anti-Semites in there, perhaps, but like, there's scant evidence that this is really a significant part of the student response to the genocide. Like you basically have a huge group of Jewish and other students across the country who are all standing united against all the violence and suffering and war crimes and everything. So you have this kind of manufactured crisis of anti-Semitism being wielded as a justification for the violence of the cops cracking their skulls, as opposed to, like you say, the warnings and then the actual reality of the January 6th mob and the kind of permissiveness and like, let's just call it as it is, the same Republicans in Congress who are, really worried about student safety in Columbia. And like Mike Johnson goes and talks at Columbia University, a truly bizarre thing, right? The MAGA Republicans were basically, for the most part, saying, January 6th, yeah, totally fine,
Yeah. There is one thing I do want to mention before I forget about it. I just want to emphasize, the whole free speech thing, because it was such a just topic of endless discussion of Barry Weiss, writing column after column in the New York Times. Every time one of these, right wing Christina Hoff Sommers,
Richard Spencer,
they'd be even protested, not even like people trying to have the event canceled. They would just show up and do free speech at them. They would say, fuck you.
Charles Murray. This
was like the death of liberalism in the West. And now, like most of those same people, Caitlin Flanagan, are saying that, these students exercising their free speech over a highly, relevant political issue need to be just summarily shut down. Their mouths need to be shut with violence. And, I think it's like, okay, hypocrisy gotchas. There are limits to that, but it's
revealing though. So
yes.
It's not that we're going to defeat our enemies politically through,
facts
exposing hypocrisy. Yeah. Yeah. But there's something revealing about the hypocrisy that is helpful to understand the nature of the dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it shows you that, these guys always were about, like, this was the project this is of a piece with the same, like Milo Yiannopoulos. I mean, he's on the outs after the whole, pedophile thing, but like right-wing speech in general must be enshrined. Everyone should be forced to listen to it. It needs to be indulged and broadcast at every opportunity. And left-wing speech, or, just speech that conservatives disagree with at all for any reason, that needs to be shut down.
Shut it down.
I get to say whatever I want. You get to shut your fucking mouth and listen. That's conservative free speech right there.
Well, and that's because conservative free speech is a species of conservative freedom writ large, which is the same thing, but broader. Like whether we're talking about speech or action or whatever, freedom is me doing whatever I want and is you not doing what I don't like.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
Precisely. Barry Weiss is a fucking liar and always has been and always will be. To wrap up the, discussion of the protests in general, I think, the final thing I would mention is that you see college administrator brain in action, and I think in general, not all administrators, but in general, the sort of tendency there is a sort of witless, just like desire to maintain the status quo. It's like people whose main activity is sort of fundraising and writing reports that nobody reads and like inventing new vice dean of provosts or whatever to make $600,000 for just gumming up the works of the system.
Well, what's funny is, don't rock the boat would make sense as their mentality in a way, but like by sending in the cops, they're rocking the boat more, because this is no longer a quiet, peaceful process that maybe got a few stories. Now it's a major escalating thing with growing numbers and growing violence and growing stories. And there's all kinds of like philosophy chairs being arrested. We have like, I'm sure there's going to be lawsuits. There's battery going on. There's
huge lawsuits.
So this doesn't fit the, let's just keep this quiet. Don't rock the boat. I don't want waves.
Right. You know? No, it's not it's not a reasoned, like an intelligent desire to preserve the status quo, because that would require, a sort of statesman-like ability to assess the situation and make good choices as to what. It's more like, oh God, there's the rabble is getting out of control. How do I make them stop? Called it police.
Well, doesn't this expose the bullshit behind so much of people who claim to be liberals, and the liberalism of like tolerance and pluralism and discussion and debate, and like as soon as there's discomfort, or I mean, let's be honest, we have some rich board of trustee members who probably don't like the speech being made, and we have various interests applying pressure, including Congress people applying pressure. And so to appease the powerful, to appease those who maybe have influence over you, let's actually use violence and force of the state to take away discourse, to take away disagreement, to take away democratic action. And so, as many have pointed out, there's a kind of parallel to the colonial nature of the occupation in Gaza and the genocide in Gaza, which is to say that like the international law, international order, or the kind of Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, that stuff is belied by the violence and fascistic kind of crackdown when those norms don't otherwise achieve what they want, right? I guess that explains a lot about what's going on, but it is just kind of horrifying to see the asymmetrical response to. I mean, that's the one of the many weird things here is like, finally you have mass politics around unfathomable suffering that's been going on for 6 months in Gaza and the West Bank. And like an appropriate emotional response to that is to do what you can to demand that whoever is contributing to it stop doing so. And, do what you can as a citizen and as an adjutant to try to get it to stop when our government and our institutions are contributing financially and so forth. But then for people in power and for elites and others to not only not care about the genocide, but then to act like they're literally posting on social media, like the students at Columbia, like Jewish students at Columbia, which of course is inaccurate because there's lots of Jewish students at Columbia and other places that are part of the protest, but presumably not those Jews, but other Jews are experiencing like the Holocaust again. Like there's these kind of messaging, like this is a lead up to the Holocaust, like this is a genocide is about to begin, starting with these protests. And this hysteria around this perceived threat. I don't know. It's so weird. It like reminds me of when we have the actual genocide going on, right? That this is in response to. It reminds me of the kind of hysteria over critical race theory and this weird kind of jujitsu thing where like talking about racism and slavery is the actual violence. And that's the actual thing that's dividing the country, is the discussion of things, right? So this is like a classic reactionary thing. No. Not the violence you're pointing to, but the violence of you talking about that thing is actually the threat to everything. And so it's old hat, but it's being deployed in the most asymmetrical way I've seen in many years, right?
Yeah, you could say that there's right there a kind of consciousness of guilt, that in their heart of hearts, the sort of broadly, liberal and centrist institutions and politicians who are supporting the Gaza thing know that it's a horrible crime, and the response to that is to, to double down on violent suppression of any protest to that because of the conviction that if they get a chance, they're going to do the same back to us. And we're going to deserve it. And I think, it's like a lot of conservatives when, during the civil rights movement in the South, Southern Dixiecrats, that, a lot of the panicked response to like Martin Luther King was that they just could not believe that he actually wanted to live, in peaceful harmony and democracy in the South. They thought that if the blacks get out of control in the South, then they're going to do reverse Jim Crow on us. And we deserve it,
Well, yeah. And another way to think of it too is, if you want to psychoanalyze it a little bit, is this idea that like when you see the people you're oppressing or their allies standing up in your face, you're forced to confront the bad thing you're doing. And as everyone's experienced, that when you call someone out on doing something bad, they get angry and attack you because they've been caught out. And there's this kind of weird emotional thing where you're like maybe ashamed and maybe like whatever. So you have to like jujitsu it. I think there's, coupled with that, this notion that I don't know. There's a story, I forget where I first heard about it or read about it. Like the Nazis, they're the kind of street thugs who are like beating up Jews in the street, and this SS officer walks by and he kind of like stops them from like the torture or whatever, and just like shoots the guy in the head or whatever. And the explanation is that like in the process, the ideological process, the thugs hadn't yet fully internalized the perceived inhumanity, and the dehumanization process wasn't complete yet. So they had to beat up the person to the point of no like human recognition, so that they could more easily like judge them to not be human. Right.
Yeah.
Whereas the higher up officer had already fully internalized it, didn't need to do the beat up torture process, could just put a bullet in the brain. It was no problem. It was clean and efficient, and like, what I mean? Something like that. Right. And so like you could almost see like, oh, this is a threat here. We need to brutalize them, because we're still like, these college students in this philosophy chair, they look real human to me still. Like, let's take them down a peg so I don't have to confront the reality of the underlying politics.
No doubt. I mean, it's, as you say, I'm not sure I'm convinced by any of my explanations, but it is just mystifying, I mean, how often are there protests on college campus for one thing or another? And 99% of the time they burn themselves out after a while. And yeah, the semester's ending. So another great win for our highly paid college presidents and top administrators. They just can't get enough of those guys. Shall we talk about Trump's legal shenanigans for a bit? Yeah, it is truly striking to witness, just the summary, awful punishment. I mean, beatings, I would say cruel and unusual punishment, peaceful protesters being like beaten up for exercising their First Amendment rights in a place that is supposed to be a shrine of education, communication,
of education and speech and discourse, and in the name of student safety.
Yeah. Well, at the same time, Donald Trump is just endlessly coddled and enabled by the legal system. So on the one hand, we have his trial going on, which, this, I think, very possibly is the closest he's ever come to a formal legal consequence for anything in his entire Life. And this, of course, this is the Stormy Daniels thing. This is the one, like we talked about on our episode with Michael. This dates back to 2016 when Trump, after the Access Hollywood tape came out, and his campaign heard that the Stormy Daniels story might break, which is namely that he committed adultery with a porn star in 2006, just after whenever it was just after the birth of his son, 4 months after the birth of his son, he cheated on his wife. And when that story was about to come out, he paid, through, an intermediary, according to his then lawyer, Michael Cohen, and David Pecker, who was the names are just too much. He was the head of the National Enquirer, as was doing a catch and kill, stories, basically paying money for stories that he would then not publish. Paid her $130,000 to pipe down, to not run the story. And so this is being charged as a falsification of business records and upgraded to a felony because it is, cast as basically hoodwinking the public, hiding information that would have been critical to the public's ability to make an informed decision about the voting in 2016. Anyway, so that's I don't know exactly. I'm not an expert in New York business law. But it seems like kind of a pretty plausible argument. The thing that's just maddening about this, formally, is that Trump has a gag order because, he can't shut his fucking mouth for 5 seconds. And he is not only talking about the trial in a way that no other criminal defendant in history could possibly get away with. He's doing what I would characterize as more crimes. He's doing jury tampering, witness tampering. He's threatening the judge. He's threatening the judge's family. And so far, he's gotten a fine for like $4,000 or something. I mean,
mm-hmm. He hasn't even, even in all the TV shows and movies, you just assume contempt, and being thrown in jail for contempt is would be a frequent thing that would have happened to him a number of times, right?
Oh God. I mean, this is
at the very least.
Yeah. I mean, I would say not only would he be in jail for contempt, there would be new charges being drawn up for blatant, public written communication. It's not like telling, hey, Joey, why don't you go down to the judge's house and show him a picture of his daughter? No, he posts that on Truth Social. And yet they don't. He may yet, because the judge seems to be getting really pissed off that Trump won't shut his mouth. But it's just like what he gets away with is just beyond belief.
Well, and it's not just Trump, although he is a special case. We saw was it yesterday that Harvey Weinstein, now he has a separate conviction in California that looks like it's not going to be disturbed, but a new trial for Harvey Weinstein in New York, because the highest court in New York is overturning his conviction based on the fact that the original trial judge let in evidence about as we know, Harvey Weinstein has over 100 allegations of, sexual assault, rape, and all these other things. And in this particular prosecution, there was evidence not only of the particular crime he was being prosecuted for, but evidence of some of his other, sexual assaults and so forth. And, the highest court in New York basically said, well, that shouldn't have been done. So you got to do the trial again without doing that. Now, it looks like he's not going to get off the hook. Even if this new trial doesn't convict him, he still has the California conviction. So he's got, I think, 16 years or something still there.
Yeah.
Anyway, but
he's not going to live that long.
The point being, and I remember at the time I was talking about this conviction and that's, a great win for the legal system, which it is. But the point has been that this is very unusual for people that are powerful to be held to account in our system, as opposed to many innocent people being criminalized and the carceral punishment system harassing and harming all kinds of people, guilty, innocent, in between. But there's a relationship apparently between the Weinstein case and the Trump case for the January 6th crimes that the Supreme Court is now going to delay, probably to the point where it won't be.
Almost certainly it won't even be started. The way they're signaling, they're going to come up with. So this, to give the background again, this is Trump's claim to have absolute immunity for anything he did as president, that basically you can't prosecute him for anything.
For public acts.
Yeah, that he did. And, the in oral arguments, the Trump's lawyer was asked explicitly whether the president could murder political opponents, and he said, "Well, maybe." Right. And the Supreme Court, situation. They're taking this seriously, and it seems as if there's 3 votes for no, the president can't murder people. 3 votes, maybe 4 for yes, he can kill anyone he wants. And the balance of opinion is like Roberts and Kavanaugh maybe, but there's like 3 votes maybe ish for, well, it may be there has to be a tailored, like they're going to invent a sort of qualified immunity type situation.
Kind of, yeah.
And that's going to take months and months and months. And they could kick it back to the DC circuit and just like they're running the clock out for Trump. That's what they're doing. Like this is a facially corrupt move. To take this preposterous that would just like end the Constitution and set up Trump as dictator.
Criminal immunity, which is again different from civil liability, but criminal immunity for a president is just.
You're ending the rule of law right there, like formally and explicitly ending the rule of law. The president is above the law. He can do whatever he wants, up to and including murdering political opponents.
There's this hilarious exchange during oral arguments where Trump's lawyer is like, oh, he still has a duty to follow the law. But just, the remedy of being, put in jail is not allowed.
Yeah.
so one of the justices is like, well, that doesn't really work. Like the way that the criminal system works is like the leverage against you. The reason that people don't break the law is presumed is because of the punishment of being put in jail. Like that's how it works. So like, if we just say that the president has a duty to follow the law, but then, oh yeah, by the way, if you don't follow the law, there'll be no repercussions that are like criminal. Maybe you'll get impeached. I don't know. But otherwise, if you've got the numbers in Congress or whatever, go for it. Murder your political opponents, take bribes from foreign governments, whatever you want to do. And that's kosher, according to the Supreme Court. Can you imagine what that would, come on, that the precedent that would set would just be disastrous.
Yeah. Forget impeachment, just murder the senators.
So, how's the vote looking for impeachment? Okay, let's just take out the votes against us.
Yeah, you just say, you vote for me, I'm going to murder you. You vote to impeach me, I'm going to hit you with a sword missile.
That's right. And you don't even have to do the murder because you could just have the real threat of it. So that's the nice thing.
These senators going to... And
journalists, how would that work for journalism? I think, might that do a chill on free speech if you can just like the president could just do whatever he wants to anyone?
Yeah. We see here, that, on one level, Trump has even more seriously corrupted the federal judiciary and in particular the Supreme Court by, putting like right-wing toadies on there who say that, Trump's a very special boy who can do whatever he wants and Democrat laws are unconstitutional. By definition. But you also just see how the whole legal process is just structurally incredibly conservative, the whole system. And another thing to mention, by the way, that it's not the New York Court of Appeals, but it's like another court that is made up of those same judges. I forget what it's called, but that court in New York State was the one that reduced Trump's legal penalty in his other conviction for all of his business crimes having to do with the Trump organization. It was $454 million. They cut it down to $175 million pending appeal. And it's just like, oh, rich guy in the docket. Well, what does he need? We'll give it to him. We got to let the process play out. And the process sucks. The process is, if you're Caliph Browder and you're falsely accused of stealing a backpack, you spend 3 years in Rikers before you even get a trial. And you're so mentally damaged by the constant abuse that you end up killing yourself after you're finally released. Right. But Donnie Trump can't pay the money. And even when his bond that he did pay for the $175 million turned out to be legally wrong, that it was a paperwork, he hadn't gone through the process appropriately, they just gave him a do-over. Go ahead and file your... Look at
the fascistic alliances you have when you have like Kyle Rittenhouse shooting people, taking his gun and crossing state lines to shoot to shoot in self-defense protesters at the George Floyd protests. Not only does he get away with it, but then he's valorized, is making a ton of money, and he's like a hero of the MAGA right for being a good vigilante who's protecting the country from minorities or whatever. And then you have the January 6th stuff, which like we've gone over how terribly the takedown of the people that did that were, but that they're also called heroes and valorized by the right. But then when you have freedom of speech to protest a genocide, a fascistic genocide in the little safe, like free speech zone on a prestigious campus. No, those are terrorists that you have to send in the cops to crack skulls, right? Those are the terrorists. And you can see that it's not about, is the violence coming from state or not state actors? It's not about freedom of speech, not freedom of speech. It's just about whose side are you on and who has the power to do the violence, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really solidified to me a belief that I've come to hold, that liberal legal institutions like the ACLU, the various, nonprofits that do, legal aid work, a lot of that's very important. The ACLU less so. I think the ACLU has done a lot of really stupid things, but insofar as you're reinforcing the courts as the site to where you sort of figure out if people have rights or not, it's probably a good thing to try, but you are playing on systematically slanted terrain. The courts are conservative, and there's a brief period where they were kind of like balanced, in the middle of the 20th century for about 20 years when there was a liberal Supreme Court majority. But before that time, before the New Deal, basically for the whole of the 19th century, and then after, once Nixon got a new conservative Supreme Court majority, the courts have just been systematically biased, against workers, against minorities, against criminal defendants, just
against women.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, overturning even their own, kind of good things that they've done, like Roe versus Wade, which is inadequate in terms of providing actual abortion access in a lot of the country, but at least was better than nothing. Now we don't even have that. And so, this idea that I think is deeply, deeply rooted in a lot of the liberal movement, and especially like liberal, fancy lawyers, that, well, we have to have, like, this is just how we have to fight politically. We have to file lawsuits, and we have to do, and I think it's just a lost cause, basically, for the most part.
It's always, especially when you hear people saying this is the panacea, or this is the, just vote harder, or the court will take care of it, or like, there are liberal reforms, and there are things that are sites of struggle that you can't just like cede to the right. You definitely have to like try to pack the court. You have to try to put in the judges and justices that aren't reactionary as best you can. You have to do all of the fighting still, but you can't just be naive and think that that's what's going to get the job done. You have to like all the different fronts of the battle have to be fought. Yeah.
The fight should be, as you say, like file the lawsuits and everything, but also reduce the power of the legal system, take back Congress's power from the Supreme Court. It's funny, back in the New Deal, that this was like, the whole sort of judicial activism thing was flipped, and that the liberals were saying, like, we don't need to question the power of Congress and the president, to decide on policy, because, that's not what judges should be doing. And now we're basically back to that same, status. And what we need is, less Supreme Court, less lawsuit influence over policy, and
more democracy, frankly.
Yeah, more democracy.
And I think a number of people have pointed out the interconnection between not just Israel, Palestine, and not just free speech on college campuses, but like all of the democratic versus fascistic or anti-democratic forces. Whatever the battle is, in this country, the cops are called to crack down on the pro-democratic protesters or forces, right? So like whether it's about racism, whether it's about fighting for foreign policy and anti-genocide, anti-war, whatever the liberatory emancipatory battle is, the carceral state and the police state is the enforcer of the anti-democratic fascistic side. And so like the kind of, whether it's abolitionist or decarceral movement and defund the police, whatever the slogan that you want is, whatever that movement is called, is fundamental, because that is the violent arm of the state that cracks down on all the liberatory movements.
Yeah.
Uniformly.
Yeah. And I would say, the police in particular are like not even part of the government really, in terms of being like agent of the civilian elected leadership. They've become in many cities, probably most cities, a totally rogue institution.
They're like Pinkertons, to be honest.
Yeah, like military and like tutelary democracies, they call them, like Ataturk's Turkey, where the military felt free to meddle in politics to their heart's content.
Oh yeah, the politicians are scared of the police.
Yes. And that I think is what I would emphasize, that there's a lot of disappointment with like Boston's mayor, Wu, and of course, Eric Adams is hopeless. But, I remember during the George Floyd protests, the freaking NYPD kidnapped the mayor's daughter, and the police union posted her arrest record online, including a lot of sensitive personal information. They posted that on Twitter. And an hour after that happened, Bill de Blasio, Bill de Blasio, he put out a statement saying it was time for the protesters to go home. I mean, it was just blatant intimidation of who is supposed to be in charge of the police. And, the flip side of that is, in a lot of cities, the police have stopped even pretending to do their jobs. Like the stuff that is, arguably kind of a good idea, like enforcing traffic laws. In San Francisco, they just don't do that anymore. And
I think a lot of that is a retaliation for police reform. Exactly.
Yeah. They're infuriated at the idea that the civilian, leadership of the government could tell them, even in a slight way, what to do. Namely, like stop beating people up.
I mean, it's not either or, but the threat of Trump or Trumpism is nothing compared to this threat, like across the country. But of course, they're interlinks, obviously.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember I wrote an article in 2015, speculating on the fascism question, that like, a classic aspect of fascism is the paramilitary, the SA in the black shirts in Italy. And I said, well, Trump doesn't have a paramilitary, but he kind of doesn't need one because he has the police. And the police are a sort of like extra legal, independent bodies armed to the teeth.
And they're accompanied by, the what is those neo-fascist groups like
Proud Boys.
Proud Boys is when I was thinking of it. Patriot Front, whatever. But then even without an organized group, you saw in Philly during the George Floyd protests, the cops like working with these like neo-Nazi type just citizens who were out with their guns or bats or whatever that just wanted to work with the cops to beat up like black people and college students and whoever else was protesting. Because, they knew which side they were on, and the cops didn't care that they were out and about with weapons or doing whatever, because they were on the right side. So it's again, the kind of, brown shirts, black shirts, the various thugs, whether or not they're officially endorsed by the state or not. Right.
And just like with the, the courts, as I was saying, like what we need to do is reduce the power of the legal system. Any project of police reform worthy of the name would start basically by dismantling the entire structure, the entire structure of this totally lawless, independent body that feels free to intimidate elected officials. And you have, all these centrists and liberals like Matt Iglesias and stuff who are like, well, look at this study. It shows that if we hire more police, crime goes down slightly. And if you want the police, if you believe the police, have a role to play, they cannot, as a foundational matter, they cannot feel free to intimidate their elected, superiors. And, that would be a necessary first step to even like making the police, do what they're theoretically supposed to do to enforce the law. They don't do that. They let right-wing criminals go free while beating up non-criminals, just people who are, philosophy professors who are asking them a question. And
you can even think about, part of the leftist project is to democratize all things, including the economy. But like, if you want to democratize public safety, I'm an abolitionist, so I think that it ultimately requires totally dismantling the system, the carceral system and the police. But whatever you want to do about it, it has to put the demos, the people, in charge and have democratic control over whatever like state structure you have that has violence that it's willing to like deploy, right?
Yeah, and this is, it's just like basic, democratic republic stuff, and we basically don't have one of those. Miserably. And the remaining scraps of it that can be described as such are being dismantled by the courts and the cops, and that's where we have to attack.
But Ryan, what's good for Democrats in an election year? It's to beat up young people and ban TikTok. This is a killer move. This is like, let's facilitate genocide. And when young people are upset about it, let's crack their skulls and then take away their TikTok. This is a great PR move for Biden.
I don't even know where to start with that.
We can just end it there.
Yeah.
Something to chew on for everyone. And the adults in the room are in charge. They've got it handled, apparently. Is there anything hopeful or good we can end on? There
is one thing actually I meant to mention in our last couple of minutes, which is that some Ukraine aid finally did get through.
Right.
The
bundled with money for Israel and the TikTok ban, right? But some good news. The TikTok ban, I think, is not going to happen because, first of all, it wouldn't happen for 9 to 12 months anyway. But also the courts are, even though we just shat all over the courts, even these courts are probably not likely to let this one go through.
Yeah, unlikely. I don't know.
Just as a constitutional matter, don't conflate policy questions with constitutional questions, because as a constitutional matter,
I've been reading up on this, like forced divestment, of certain companies has happened before, where like foreign located companies are not allowed to own this or that. I don't know. It doesn't strike me as being like
you have to have good evidence. There's got to be there has to be a compelling government interest and a narrowly tailored remedy and evidence of the wrongdoing, and that the remedy would resolve it, basically.
There is a law in China that the government that says explicitly that any private company has to give all their data to the government whenever they ask. There's not any sort of, we don't have a data privacy tool either. It does seem kind of preposterous that this privacy notion, when like you can just go to the data broker site that sells publicly your personal information, for not very much money, when it's like, well, what if the Chinese get their TikTok data? Well, they could just go and buy it now, because of the way we set up our structure. It's like, what are we even so upset about? If, I would much rather have a privacy law like Europe, which doesn't.
Sure. Let me just say that this government that just passed the surveillance laws to like keep spying on Americans, I don't think that their real concern is our data protection.
It's xenophobia at bottom, especially for Republicans, but if it did.
And also, if I may, because there seems to be a huge backlash to the popular opposition to Gaza and what's going on right now, TikTok for young people is a major source of images, videos, and journalism on the Gaza genocide. So.
Yeah, I think that's plausibly a motivation. But back to our positive ending.
The good news. Ukraine is getting some money.
Ukraine got a whole bunch of new weapons. In fact, some of them have already arrived, and apparently they're making a difference. And it was bundled with aid to Taiwan and Israel, but Israel doesn't even need it. It's kind of ironic that it happened because of, Israel attacked the Iranian embassy in Damascus and killed a top general there. And then Iran responded with a big drone and missile attack on Israel. Yeah. And then all of the conservatives were like, oh, we must help Israel, even though like none of the drones, only a couple of them got through, caused only minor damage. But because
and intentionally Iran made it so they didn't send their fastest missiles, and they kind of knew that everything was going to get knocked down, I think.
Yeah, it was performative, I think, on both, because they were like, we consider this matter ended. But anyway, the perception that we had to be perceived to be supporting Israel, that broke this loose, and Democrats insisted that Ukraine got some too, and that hopefully should tide them over for the rest of this year, because it's a pretty big package, $64 billion, I think. And we should know,
the Russians lost their minds. They didn't think that was going to happen, I think.
Yeah, Iran, which is closely allied with Russia, is like, whoops. Blame Israel, I guess, which is also closely aligned with Russia. But anyway, so good news for them, coming way too late, but it should help them at least stabilize the situation over there, which was going sideways in a pretty bad way. Russians were making some significant advances in the east. So I hope that helps them out. And that's about the...
Yeah. Well, here's hoping all the violence and suffering and war will end as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But that's the status for now.
Yeah. So thanks for listening, everybody, and we will see you in the next episode.